Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome back to our way too in-depth guide to surviving Mars. So we've cleared everything here and explained all the statistics in grotesque detail. You can see the breakdown here, but it's not really that different from what I've already told you. Alright, so let's go on to the next page here. Alright, we find ourselves on the payload screen, and this is what our first rocket is going to be carrying to Mars. Now, there's no adjustment as far as I can tell for changing things here to adjust the difficulty. In fact, we could opt to take nothing at all, and the difficulty bonus would stay the same. So there's nothing in the challenge mode that's going to alter based on what you bring at this phase, so feel free to bring whatever you find most useful. Up here we can see the name of the ship. We are allowed to rename it if we want to. We can also see the cargo capacity is going to be defaulted to 0 kilograms. I can't remember how much they actually carry, but I believe it's 50,000 kilograms, or 50, I'm not sure what it represents actually, if it's 50 kilograms or 50,000 kilograms. But in any event, the next thing we got here is the funding. This is the amount of money that we have, and you'll notice that it's not the amount that was promised in the previous page. That's because we've already spent a certain amount of it on the stuff that we see here. We are allowed to change what we do bring in our first wave of stuff though. So let's take a look at the prefab buildings and see what is what here. So the drone hub is one of the few buildings that I find to be not necessary, but super good to have on our first wave. And the reason is that there are 3 things in this game that can control drones. It's the shuttle itself, the RC rover, and the drone hub. Now, you do need one of these 3 things to have your base functioning at all. If you don't have any of those 3 things, then nothing gets done. Your base breaks down and everything just goes to shit. So you do have to have one of those 3 things. The RC rover is mobile, but it has a very small coverage range, which makes it difficult to actually get a lot of the work that you want done. If you're working across a fairly large area, this thing is actually completely incapable of really doing it. So you're going to either have to rely on landing a shuttle near where you want it, or you're going to have the drone hub. So while you can just rely on the shuttle, if the shuttle launches and you forgot to have anything else, what's going to happen is that all of your drones are going to stop working because they no longer have a command. If you have the RC rover, you're going to find yourself choked for space and you're having to constantly micromanage it. If you've got the drone hub, this thing has a very large radius. It comes with 4 free drones. It's not that expensive, and it is a very effective building. I can't really stress enough that this makes your life a lot less inconvenient. So next up we've got the moisture vaporator. And the moisture vaporator produces 1 unit of water, and I'm not really sure what the measure is, but basically the moisture vaporator produces 1 unit of it, which is enough to power a few things, but not very much. You are going to either need quite a few moisture vaporators, you're going to need some upgrades for them, or you're going to need to find groundwater, but this doesn't negate the fact that they're very useful. For one, if you're playing an honest game, which I don't necessarily recommend, you will need to have a moisture vaporator unless you can guarantee getting water because you've taken the hydro engineer. And if you got the hydro engineer and then the water spawns somewhere really terrible, then that doesn't help you at all. The moisture vaporator is required in the early game because you're going to need it to fuel the fuel refinery. And the fuel refinery consumes water and turns it into fuel. This is how you're going to get your rocket back into space. Now, if you're playing as the International Mars mission and you've got 5 rockets anyway, maybe you don't really care if you can launch your rockets into space or not, or you're playing as Spacey and you've got like a rocket engineer or something like that, and you've got like 4 rockets, I think, or something like that, and you want to just leave them all on Mars, then maybe you don't care as much about the fuel refinery, but you'll eventually need to get your rockets back into space, going and back to Earth, so that they can bring you more stuff or bring you more passengers or something like that, and that's what the fuel refinery is for. You're going to need it to do that. So you could opt to try and find groundwater and use that to fill the fuel refinery, but the moisture vaporator is much more consistent, and broadly speaking, if you can get away with powering something with the moisture vaporator, it's much better to do that because the ground deposits can be fully depleted, and once they're gone forever, with some exceptions based around technology. Next up, we got the Stirling generator. This is a very expensive but very high quality electrical generating device. It produces basically 4 times as much electricity as a windmill or a large solar panel. The problem is that you don't really care too much about that because you could just build 4 solar panels or 4 of the windmills, and it ends up being a bit more cost effective to do that than it is to build 1 Stirling generator. Also, these things require a polymer to repair it, so they're a little bit not great as far as starting off goes. You will learn how to build them later on, and once you've learned how to build them, and once you're producing loads and loads of polymers, these become much more useful and much more relevant. But for now, we're going to ignore these in the purchase menu. You're not going to want to buy one. Next up, we got the machine parts factory, polymer factory, and electronics factory. Now, these look like they'd be a great idea to become self-sufficient really quickly, so you might want to start off with them because of that, but the reality is these all require people to work them. So none of these do anything on their own. You're going to have your domes with residents in them before that's relevant, and you're not going to have that for quite a while into the game anyway, so you can ignore these for the time being, but you will want to either have them or want to know how to build them later on. It's quite often actually easier to get the prefabs, but they're so expensive that there's a lot of times where I don't have the money to buy them by the time I need them. So, if you do have the money to get them and you do need to start producing stuff in factories, then go ahead, but otherwise, basically can ignore that. Going back here, RC Rover, we've already mentioned what that does. It acts as a drone hub. It allows us to sort of build things away from our drone systems. Can be useful as well for recovering our other RC vehicles if they get damaged or disabled or anything like that. RC Explorer, this is for discovering anomalies. There's also a tech which allows them to passively generate research, which is a really, really strong ability. You're going to want to definitely have that one. The RC Transport is a sort of transport thing. You can use it to shuttle resources from hub to hub, but the most important thing about this is that it's capable of harvesting surface nodes of metals and bringing it to your storage depots. And there's tons and tons of metal on the map in this game, allowing you to sort of move this out to a place that's got loads and loads of surface deposits of it, strip that bare, and bring it back to your supply depot without having to build mines and without having to ship it from Earth. This is what makes it so that you can easily get lots and lots of metal without having to buy it or without having to worry about sending people down into the mines for a good portion of the game. Eventually you will need to get that going for you, but in the early stages this is an invaluable asset for making sure that you've constantly got enough metal to build everything that you want to. Next up is drones. You are going to need some drones. If you've got the RC Rover, you can sort of get by without it, but if you were relying, for example, on the drone hub and you don't have an RC Rover, what's going to happen is you're going to land and find out that you can't build the drone hub because you have to build the drone hub with a drone. So at the bare minimum, you're going to want to have one drone, and often I find it's best to have like either 4 or 8, somewhere around there, so 6 is a good number. 4 is basically the absolute least I would ever want to start with. But having more drones means that more stuff can get done more quickly. You'll be able to shuffle them around as necessary. They're a really strong tool and a really strong asset. You can, of course, just send tons of drones in later. You can also learn how to build them. I find it actually often easier to get them from Earth for a good chunk of the game, but later on you might want to start building them yourself. Next up are 3 resources that we're going to completely ignore for now. They're all set to 0 as is appropriate. Concrete is the easiest resource to find on the surface of Mars. You're almost guaranteed to be able to find some. You're guaranteed to have lots of it across the playthrough under most circumstances unless you've chosen a very particular map. And it is a relatively easy to extract resource that you can do with automated extractors. You don't need people on Mars, and they produce quite a lot without you having to use too many resources to get it. So it's really a waste to buy it from Earth. Metals, similarly, you can get enough of it from the surface using the RC Transport. Sometimes you might find yourself in a bit of a sticky situation and incapable of actually succeeding with the metal that's on the surface. In that particular case, you might need to buy some, but you would never want to start with purchasing metal. Food, you don't need to worry about this at the start. Your first rocket is never going to have people in it because you need to have domes before you can really get people there, and it takes a while to set those up. So food is something you could ignore until later in the game, and hopefully you'll be able to be self-sufficient without the food shipments. Next up are the advanced materials. Now you are going to be blowing through these quite quickly, and you're going to need them in quite large amounts. Polymers are required for things like domes and Stirling generators and a bunch of other things. It's a fairly rare resource that you can sometimes find on the surface of Mars, but broadly speaking you are going to need to buy it from Earth up until you can produce it yourself. We are going to need more of these resources, these 3 in particular, so we're going to be shipping more of them. The machine parts, these are for a lot of different things. Things like windmills require these. A lot of other buildings require them. And you will be chugging through these very quickly in the early game. So much so that we're actually going to reduce the number of polymers that we have by 5 and increase the machine parts to 20. We are going to be sending an immediate shipment with more of all of these, but we're going to be blowing through the machine parts immediately rather than later. The electronics is the least important for the early game, but you will be still using some of them. A few of the high-tech buildings, especially inside your domes, do require electronics, and things like academies and stuff like that all require electronics. So this is something that you're going to need quite a bit later, but isn't too important in the early game. You will need a few of them in the early game, though, just kicking around just in case. Orbital probes, these allow you to scan sections of Mars. Now, I recommend taking a few of them, but broadly speaking, I do recommend a trick that I'll show you guys once we get into the game to stretch the utility of these first ones out a little bit more, but 3 of them is perfectly fine at the start there. Alright, so that's everything that we've got in this particular screen. Let's go ahead and see the next one. Now, there's a couple different ways that we can select a landing spot, and what I recommend for most new players in particular, but even veteran players, because it's simply a little bit easier, is to basically select a site here based on what you're sort of looking for, rather than trying to find a random spot. Like, you can click anywhere on the planet and it will allow you to have a colony there. I recommend using the listed ones because the maps don't actually change, so every time I go to Margarita for Alpha, it's the same. And this means that I've got that sort of constancy. It means that I'll know what's going to happen there. So if I want to change something up, or if I want to play it but with different breakthrough text, or if I want to try something different to see if I can succeed again, or if I just like the map, it's a lot easier to find Margarita for Alpha because it's marked here, as opposed to trying to find the exact coordinates of another colony site. Now, you can write down the colony site. What the hell is... Huh. Interesting. But yeah, it's much easier for me to find this particular spot as opposed to trying to click around the map to try to find an exact coordinate site without having written down that coordinate site in advance, and then even then it's a little bit tricky to find it exactly there. So this is the easiest way to make sure that you find somewhere that's relatively interesting, balanced, and fun to play. They're not all necessarily easier. You can find some pre-made spots that are a little bit trickier. I can't remember which ones are, but... Well, either way, there's also the option to play on this gigantic mountain here, Olympus Mons. This, I think, had the hardest difficulties in the game, if I recall correctly. I can't remember what part of it does. I think it's over here. I think it's around here, so if you're really in for something challenging, this is where you would probably go for that, but broadly speaking, I don't really care too much about that particular sort of location there, just for the challenge of it. So we are going to go with Margarita for Alpha, and we're going to go ahead and hit start here, and I will see you guys once this loads in. Alright, here we go. So we're going to go ahead and give this a start. Now, normally I would say to immediately pause the game so that you've got the maximum chance to sort of do things, but we're going to be doing something a little bit cheaty here. So what we're going to do is take our orbital probes and we're going to scan the first 3 tiles of the map here. And if you've got more orbital probes, all the better, but broadly speaking, that's what we're going to be doing. Now, we haven't found anything at all in those tiles, and that's perfectly fine, but what we're going to do is restart the map. And this is going to require it to load, but we'll be right back here once we... Alright, now you can see that we have got to the same sort of spot that we were before. We've got our orbital probes. We still know the same spot here. This doesn't change no matter how many times we do this, unless we go back to the main menu and do the whole thing over from scratch, which is what we want to avoid doing here. But we are allowed to go ahead and do this with the next 3 spots. And we've discovered a little sort of thing here. This is going to be a breakthrough, so that's good. But what we're going to be able to do is scan the entire map ahead of time and know what is in every single tile. And this is very, very much cheating. I am fully aware of that, and I am fully agreeing with that. But the thing is that I don't think it makes sense for humanity to not blanket probe the area that they're considering for a landing. That is something that would definitely be in the space program's mind. If you disagree, I think that the best way to do it is to sort of look for areas that are kind of flat but not very flat. I'm pretty sure that Sector C6 has some stuff there. I think that this one probably has some stuff in it. just based off of the fact that usually I find that if it's got a little bit of a thing that's impassable, it tends to push resources towards the habitable area, and that makes it more likely. Also, I find that you very rarely ever find resources on the edge of things, and you never find resources in areas like this, for example, or really like here, or for example, you want to find somewhere that's open, but not necessarily too open. Alright, so let's go ahead and hit restart again here. And I'll be right. Alright, and we are back. So after significant sort of clicking around and doing stuff, I've decided on these ones. This is one of the rare times where actually the starting sector was one of the better ones. The other ones that I scanned started off with these beakers, and these things give you a 1,000 to 1,500 point science boost. So those are a fantastic thing to get your science going really quickly. The other place that I scanned had water over here. Now, like I said, if you don't want to do the sort of cheaty thing, like your start zone will be guaranteed to have two of the things that you require. It's guaranteed to have concrete, it's guaranteed to have metal. So that is enough technically to get you started no matter what. Now, we're going to go ahead and start clicking around here. This is going to provide us zones that we're going to automatically scan. This is going to give us an idea of what's around us. We sort of already know, but these ones scan much more quickly if they're near our base, so that is going to be what we do. And we're going to go ahead and set down right around here. I think this ought to do it. So we don't necessarily want to start right on top of the stuff, but that's fine. Anyway, now we've got our sector scan. Let's see what we can do for technologies. The ones that I always like getting are the ones that increase our science right off the bat there. As you can see here, increases research provided by sponsor by 100. So this is the amount from our sponsor, 400 by default. Increasing that to 500 means that every 2 days we'll passively gain one of these early techs, which is a really good bonus for us. We're also going to go with extractor upgrades because we want to start advancing this tech tree, and we kind of want to start advancing like all of our tech trees just a little bit here. So we're going to start picking up some basic techs here. Now you can see that I see 2 rows. That's again a consequence of being Europe. If we were any other faction, all we would see is moisture vaporators here. We wouldn't know that water reclamation is the next tech, and this is a very handy thing since the tech web is randomized. You'll notice as well that the breakthroughs list is empty. That is because we do not know what breakthroughs are in this playthrough yet. And this is why I'm saying as well, if you are in this for a sort of long haul kind of playthrough, it is a better idea to use the mod that guarantees specific breakthroughs, because if you're playing it and you want to have a specific type of city, you do want to know what that is in advance. So in addition to doing that, we're going to go ahead and go into our rockets here, and we're going to start shipping an immediate second rocket here. What we could potentially do is go for another moisture vaporator fuel refinery. That often is a good combination, but since we did discover water relatively near us, we don't need the moisture vaporator that badly before we get a dome. I don't need the RC rover that badly, so we're just going to go ahead and get the transport. We're going to get 4 more drones because I do find that more drones is a useful thing, and we're going to start bringing in a bunch of resources here. I'm probably just going to go 20 polymers, 25 electronic or machine parts. Probably that many of these, and we'll fill in the rest of this with, probably will get a moisture vaporator then, since we've got enough space left. We've still got over 2 billion left, and we've got a little bit of space left, so let's go ahead and get one more set of these and one more set of these. So down to 0 kilograms, we still got 2 billion in funding. We got a decent amount of stuff here. Again, RC rover, we might send it on our 3rd launch, but this is perfectly fine for now. You do want to send your launch immediately, and it is going to mostly be machine parts and polymers. I could even go a little bit heavier on machine parts rather than polymers for this, because you are going to be blowing through your machine parts really quickly. And the electronics is just a lot less important. The moisture vapor is going to be nice once we get our actual colony up and running, but we're not going to really need it right now, per se, but it is a useful thing to have in your colony. So we're going to go ahead and hit the launch button. That's going to start heading towards here, and yeah, we're going to go ahead and call this one an episode. We wanted to show you guys how to set up, get to the planet, and what you're going to need in terms of resources to get here. So this water is going to be super important for us. This concrete is going to be super important for us, and all these little bits of iron all over the map here are going to be important for us. Those are what you're looking for when you go for a spot there. This underground rare metal is also going to be a useful resource pretty soon, but not right away. It is what we're going to be using our first dome, though, to collect. And we're going to be using that to try and fund our colony while we keep trying to get it up and running. It's also going to be where we get the resources that we're requiring for our additional additional buildings later on when we start manufacturing electronics, because you'll manufacture electronics out of rare metals. Anyway, that's going to be our episode for today. Hope you found it informative, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.